And it turns out they got the information wrong. It wasn't that cousin. After the family's been terrorized, I mean, $500 property crime, replacing the door costs thousands. You know, are the stories of mothers of teenage sons especially should be concerned. I mean, a gram of marijuana. I have two cases, one in Howard County, one in Carroll County, and one in Howard County, where that was the basis of a warrant where they kicked in the door. I think in one case, the dog was shot, family terrorized, for a gram of marijuana in sort of the measured response. And some, the one woman in Howard County actually testified in favor of the bill. And these stories simply in front of legislators overwhelmed them. So information is powerful, but you have to have that information. I think this bill, and I think for us, this is sort of like this group therapy, you know, sort of like, you know, trying to make something positive happen from our experience. I got to meet some wonderful people who were really happy to have an opportunity to tell their stories. A couple, 4 points I just wanted to hit on, and what I really love to do is get questions and hopefully be part of the conversation at the end of this is, you know, I want to talk a little bit, one, about transparency and the power of transparency. Two, the importance of oversight, not just the SWAT teams, but the police in general. Three, I want to talk about the need for real standards, tangible standards that are meaningful. And four, I want to talk a little bit about leadership and civilian leadership, elected leadership in this whole discussion. Transparency, a lot of people said with my bill, and people who probably agree with me, well, it's just a transparency bill. It's just a, you know, another regulation. And I really can't overstate the value, the power of knowledge, because just like some of you grimaced when I said 700 times a year, that's the that's the power of information. To know that allows you to start asking questions. And what I've learned about this thing during the Senate hearings on this bill, a senator from Baltimore County, who was actually probably the one who passed committee unanimously, but he was probably the one most on the fence. He really hit me on this point. So, well, it doesn't really do anything. And then I brought up an example in Prince George's County. They originally said in my case that they had a no-knock warrant. That turned out not to be true. They didn't have a no-knock warrant. I got it 3 days after the event and read it looking for something that said they could enter my home without knocking, and it wasn't there. But it later came out that Prince George's County made the public statement, and said it on CNN, that there's no such thing as a no-knock warrant in the state of Maryland, which is an astonishing fact, because at the press conference I had like an hour before, we passed out copies of the law that passed in 2005. So the fact that the head of the county's anti-narcotics division, a major, didn't know fundamental tenets of Maryland law is an astonishing fact. But it's a fact you wouldn't know unless you realize that they've never applied for a no-knock warrant. Because apparently they believe they don't exist. And they then rely on the exigent circumstance clause, that if there are exigent circumstances, they can make a decision to go in a no-knock fashion. So it was inconvenient for a law because having the parameters box them in. So not having a law was much more helpful in allowing them to go in and use circumstances on scene to make that decision on scene, not having to go to a judicial officer and getting pre-authorization. But the point is, without that information, how do you even, without transparency, without some sort of reporting mechanism to know what's happening, what good are standards? You know, what good is oversight? You're overseeing what you can't see, and it doesn't work. So I'm really excited to have a bill in Maryland that beginning January of next year, for the time period from July 1 through December 31, we're going to have a report for a 6-month period of time that's going to give us that information. And I think has the potential to reform a public policy conversation about the oversight and the standards that should be put in place. I'm going to flip on that. I'm going to talk about standards in a second. Because that's ultimately the next real goal. The real goal is to have tangible standards that they have to use. And I don't mean best practices. People use the term best practice. Well, let's look at some best practices. No, let's look at standards. Because best practices are suggestive. They're sort of voluntary. Well, should we adopt best practices? Sure. Standards is, here's what we have to do. Here are the procedures we have to follow. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that the best policy is to set standards that apply to every single jurisdiction in the state of Maryland the same, because I'm not a big fan of uniformity. I'm just not. I think different circumstances apply in different places, and the challenges we face in Prince George's County are different than the challenges you face in Carroll County or Allegheny County. But what's become clear is that Prince George's County isn't going to do these things on their own, and so it may be necessary next legislative session, armed with actual facts from the bill that we've been able to pass, to take that information and go in and maybe create some type of statewide commission to develop statewide standards. That doesn't mean they have to be, uniform standards. It could mean that they are sort of a threshold of things, but it would really begin to raise serious questions about whether it's appropriate in every single instance to that their drugs are involved. No other facts relevant. You sort of always deploy a SWAT team.